And we're here with Dread Mob Recharged with everything you need to know about the Dread Mob. This is a comprehensive guide for those that have little to no experience in Dread Mob or are looking to get reignited and re-involved in this Dread Mob Dakka, as this attachment brings some utility, versatility, and damage throttling potential that no other Ork detachment can bring. So it's actually more of a cunning detachment than some of those can really understand, and it brings a whole lot of Dakka for those that are really to dip into that sort of the brand. So with that being said, we're going to go over the unit combinations, the enhancements, the stratagems. We're going to have a list at the end that brings it all comprehensively together at a more beginner / intermediate level, as we also have plenty of list examples and other guides with this detachment already on the channel that can help you get further. So this is definitely for those that are looking to swing into the Dread Mob and get stuck in by try to press that button. So the detachment rules, try that button. Now, it's pretty amazing. It's fun. It's fantastic, but it's a little confusing. So let's actually unpack this for those who have only heard about it and maybe have misusing it or don't really know what it means. So each time you go to shoot or fight with either a mech keyworded unit, a walker keyworded unit, or a Grotz vehicle. So Grotz vehicle is simply the mech gun right now. There's not really anything else other than that. And the killicans fall under the walker aspect of that. So that means your Dread Mob, Death Dreads, Morkanaut, Gorkanaut, killicans, stuff like that. And then mech. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more. But anytime you press that button, you will get one of these three abilities, and it is random because pressing that button is a random ability. So on a 1 to 2, you will get sustain. On a 3 to 4, you get lethal. And then on a 5 to 6, and the critical wound, you get an additional -2 AP. So at first that may seem useless, but we actually have some tricks up our sleeve to actually make even that work. But alternatively, you can select the abilities, right? So remember, as we go through this entire presentation, what people really seem to misunderstand about Dread Mob is a lot of the abilities are double sided, as in you can choose to accelerate it and give yourself hazardous. Not everything is as hazardous right off the bat, but in this case, if you choose to select the ability from the button, then you gain the hazardous ability. And if you already have hazardous, or as we continue to unpack the detachment, gain hazardous in an additional way from multiple sources, now you can actually have hazardous up to 1 and 2. Now, it's actually funny because you can actually get hazardous up to 3 different ways in this detachment anyways, but you only get it up to 1 to 2. So that's a big deal here, but I do need people to understand that. So if you choose to press a button, you get hazardous. And then if you choose to press one of the detachment stratagems or other abilities to stretch them even further, you can also press that button, which is really something that people need to understand. But what they need to understand too is the shout out to our sponsors, the Baron of Dice, that allow us to do our paint competition. So shout out to them for allowing us to support the channel with great quality dice. So check them out in the description with 5% off because no one likes taxes. And shout out to Forge Fire Gaming with their high quality terrain bases that allow us to do our competitive terrain presentation. So check them out in the description. And we move on. So something that we should talk about the keywords here. So the units that actually gain the keyword and have anything to do with the keywords are simply right here. The characters are Big Mech, the Big Mech in Mega Armor, the Big Mech with Shock Attack Gun, the Solo Mech, or known as the Baby Mech. He doesn't always run solo, but he's typically known as that way. The other data sheets would be the mech guns, the killicans, the death dreads, the morkanauts, the gorkanauts, and then the stomper. Whoa, that's what I'm talking about. Also, you gain battle line Gretchen, which is fantastic. It's amazing. Something that you should not overlook in this detachment by any means, or when you're building your list out. So the Big Mac is a lot of the time looked over in a lot of the other detachments, but in this one, he actually gives you combinations that are going to be quite fun and entertaining, but also potent. The Big Mac in Mega Armor is kind of limited to his Big Mac and Mega Armor utility to act as a anchor piece and an invuln. He can also take the enhancements that we're going to talk about here. And then the Big Mac with Shock Attack Gun is one of the most notorious pieces on this. The other data sheets, as you can see, but just simply kind of linear, as they a lot of the time just go on the unit that there is, which is kind of a positive, as they don't always require character support, which a lot of the time you're playing other detachments, you're just kind of sticking characters on everything to make these units work, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. So let's talk about the enhancements, because the enhancements for this detachment are, not amazing, but they do matter, because one of them that is amazing is Get Finder Goggles. So Get Finder Goggles is for ranged weapons that are equipped by this bear. You get to ignore cover. Boom. That's fantastic. And it's only 10 points. That's pretty crazy. That's absurd. I love it for our orc weapons. A lot of the time you're going to take this on the big mech with shock attack gun, or you can take it on the big mech himself, as he would gain this value from this as well. Now, Smoky Gubbins is the other enhancement that I do find somewhat appealing, as the other two aren't really in the wheelhouse that I would like to use them, but they have merit as well. But Smoky Gubbins, you can find utility in this for sometimes putting it on your character to make your Tankbustas survive, or maybe other units like Mobs of Boys that we'll talk about later. But if you have 15 points left over, you might be able to find a way to squeeze more Gretchen on the list. So for the most part, Gift Finder Goggles is the one very much standout enhancement in this detachment that I would push that you find a way to get on your list every single time. The other ones are a bit more subjective, such as Press It Fasta. So Press It Fasta is mech only, and it's only in the shooting phase, right? If it was maybe melee as well and shooting, you might be able to find this to be a little bit more entertaining, but for 35 points, it's a bit too much. For this one, it's you roll 2 buttons if you choose to press the button. So why it says if you choose the button, to be clear, is that if you're just selecting your data sheet ability on the unit that has this enhancement, you don't get to roll for the additional one, right? You only get to activate the enhancement ability if you're under the criteria of rolling for the ability. So in that case, you're rolling 2d6, but if you have a duplicate, nothing happens. So there is the really cool chance that you can get sustain and lethal on the same unit when you use this, but it's not really reliable. So for 35 points, a bit too much. Then we have Super Glowy Thing, model unit only. So it's in the command phase. You can see one unit within 18 inches of the unit that has the character that has this, and he's visible within 18 inches. You then roll on a 1 to 2, that unit takes a battle shock. On a 3 to 4, that unit that you're looking at takes D3 mortals, and on 5 to 6, you make that unit -1 to hit. So for 25 points, in my opinion, this is usually not something you end up bringing. Like I said, if you ever have these weird gaps of 35 to 25 points, a lot of the time I just like to try to find a way to fit more Grots, more Storm Boys, more something on the list to allow me to keep playing the mission itself. So the enhancements aren't the sticking point for this detachment, but the stratagems might as well be. Now, there are a lot to these stratagems, so there is a lot right here on the screen, as you can see, but we're going to unpack it a bit. It does get a little bit wordy, but we're going to clear it up for you. So just keep in mind that for these stratagems, a tip is gaining hazardous off these stratagems is optional. So just because you're using a stratagem doesn't mean you've now gained hazardous. So that means when I press the button, I don't have to have hazardous. And then now that I use these stratagems, I don't have to have hazardous to unlock some of these combos and abilities, right? But I can to get absurd damage. So we're going to start off with one of my favorite ones that's overlooked is Clanking Claws. So on Ork Walker units, that means your Killer Can, your Death Dreads, Morkanaut, Gorkanaut, or Stompa. So what you do is you just simply get +2 strength when you use this stratagem. But if you choose to push it, now push it is what I'm talking about when I say throttling damage. If you choose to push it, so that's in tandem with the detachment of pressing that button and pushing that button. So if you choose to push it, you gain +1 damage and you have hazardous. So there's 2 ways you can gain hazardous from that now, right? That's where you gain the multiple sources of hazardous that now gain it, so you're gaining it on 1 or 2. So again, to make it clear, is if you just simply use the stratagem itself, you've gained +2 strength on your unit. So if I use this on my Killer Cans, I have gone from strength 8 Killer Clanking Claws to strength 10 Clanking Claws. But if I want to push it on this stratagem, I can now make these Clanking Claws damage 4 in combat on the Killer Cans and strength 10 from being additional 2+. Now, if I now choose to select the button ability that I want to have, so if I'm saying on the Killer Cans I want sustain, then I have sustained +2 strength and +1 damage. That's how that would work. But then I have now adopted hazardous 1 and 2. So that's one example as we clear this up. So as I unpack the rest of these stratagems, keep in mind that that's how it's being worded when it's talking about if I choose to push it. That's why I've underlined it and selected in blue for you. So that being said, I think it's awesome. You can put this on your Stompa when you do a sweep attack, takes him to a new threshold on sweep attacks, and ends up making it a more absurd sweep into elite infantry. So pretty awesome in that case. Then we have super fueled boiler. So this is specifically for your walkers. You can re-roll the advanced rolls of the model, and they have the assault ability. So this is kind of adopting a little bit from our brethren in Sorta Dakka detachment, where they can assault, but in this case, you get to re-roll the advance and you gain assault. If you're putting this on your your Gorkanaut, for example, they're now on the wall going to advance. They're going to re-roll that advance to try to get a better one innately from the stratagem, and then they're going to shoot and charge. So that's going to be pretty awesome and fun. Then you have Dakka. This is for walkers or grot vehicles, and this is exclusive to the shooting phase. Dakka, of course, where you can re-roll hit rolls of 1. Now, if you choose to push it, you can re-roll the entire hit roll. So that means for a unit of Met Guns, a unit of a Death Dread, a Stompa himself, you can use sort of Dakka stratagem, and he'll just re-roll 1s. But a lot of the time, you're going to take the risk and develop hazardous. That way, you can re-roll the entire hit roll. That's freaking awesome, considering you're choosing to have lethal or sustain. Then we move to the stratagems. Big shells for bigger gets. This is for the mech, the Great WAAAGHs, and the Grot vehicles, excuse me. So Meks units as well. So we're talking about the leaders we spoke about earlier. They have the keyword in that case. That means the units they be added to have access to this stratagem now. So this is for shooting only. This is monsters and vehicles. You get +1 to wound. If you choose to push it, you add +1 damage to that. So if it's a big unit of mech guns and you're using big shells for bigger gets, you've now given them +1 to wound, and then now they're damage 4 smasher guns on those mech guns, for example. Then you have conniving runts. After an enemy unit finishes a normal move within 9 of a Gretchen unit, so this doesn't count for your kilocans. This is Gretchen specific, which is the 40-point grot unit in your codex. If you end the move within 9 of this unit, you roll a d6. On a 4+, that enemy unit takes d3 +1 mortal wounds, and then your Gretchen unit gets to make a normal move. Now, there are some trickery in this that we'll talk about as well, but this is really good for setting up screens, flipping objectives in ways that the enemy wasn't expecting and hiding line of sight in that way. Great way of repositioning on the enemy so that in the next turn you can end up getting where you want to be. A lot of the time, conniving runs is just as conniving as the pilot can take advantage of it himself. So this really matters a lot when you're playing this detachment, because this detachment is quite Dakka heavy, and you do want to keep the enemy at arm's length away. So having a lot of battle line grots that now have the ability to throw mortal wounds and reactive move 6 is pretty awesome. Now, there are ways that you can reactive move even greater. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit. Then we have, last but not least, is extra gubbins. So an Ork Walker unit or vehicle unit, shooting phase only, subtract 1 damage, excluding Titanic units. So your Gork Mork Stompa cannot do this, cannot reduce damage by 1. So this is really only valuable in kilocans, Death Dreads, and the mech guns. So that's the stratagems. Now, these stratagems, when you start taking the detachment abilities itself and these stratagems, and whatever your data sheet abilities are from the units we're going to talk about in a bit, that's where the damage starts stacking in an absurd way, in the Dakka way that no other Ork detachment has. So there obviously exists more Dakka detachment. More Dakka does have good mobility, and it does have other ways to benefit your shooting. But in a lot of cases, this detachment is going to be able to throttle it much further because of the same data sheets that more Dakka is trying to use, but in tandem with the data sheet ability and these stratagems that we've shown right here. So really exciting. And we're going to look at the Dread Mob Walkers. So we're going to talk about the Walkers here. Now, we do have breakdowns of all of these units even further in their own extensive further videos, but we're going to touch them up here again because this is actually what I like to use in pilot in Dread Mob if I am running walkers in my dread mob list, because there's a couple ways to actually run dread mob. But if you're actually going to use walkers, these are the ones I like. So you have the Def Dread with the loadout that I love to call the nuke. Now, the nuke is where you take 3 to 4 custom mega blasters. If you do take only 3, of course, you're adding a claw. If you're taking 4, you're an absurd get. You can make the argument for making it 3 to 4 rockets, but a lot of the time, you know, in 40K, we're here to just do the damage and find out the results later, right? All the other, I'm going to hope to plan, survive here, and do this other trickery. That's secondary. And Orks, a lot of the time, are presenting threat saturation. So if I can just get enough units on the line, throwing out damage and getting the potential going, that's pretty cool. And this Def Dread kind of does that. Now, he does work as a ingress or a late game piece. If you can kind of keep him alive for the later turns of 3, 4, 5, as people start running out of resources, he can end up being a bully, right? And once your other big units and bricks and killing things have existed and been deleted from the field from all the damage and carnage, he's taking the advantage of still being able to utilize stratagems late game and existing. So it actually does happen. It actually is pretty interesting. His toughness 2, reducing damage, that all becomes more of a factor. His 2+ save actually becomes more of a factor later in the game. If you can take 3 custom mega blasters, re-roll the entire hit roll on that, and then you choose lethal. If you're trying to hit something that's you're wounding on 5 or 6s, you're going to put 4 to 5 wounds on the person. They take some saves, they fail 2 or 3 of them, they're taking 2 to 3 d6 damage. Or you can use that on elite infantry if you're wanting to take out rockets on them. So there's kind of cool with that. Then you have the killicans. Killicans are the antithesis, if I can't say the word correctly because I'm Ork, of this damage stacking potential in this detachment, right? So the fact that you can use the stratagems that we spoke about earlier and the actual detachment of pressing the button, you also get to use the data sheet ability that the cans have themselves. Now, you might actually blow yourself up first. You can talk about that in the other video, but this is where you just start stacking absurd damage of +1 no wound, +1 strength, +1 damage in multi phases, and it gets kind of crazy. Now, I do typically only advise that you want to stick one of these units on your list. They are quite CP intensive, and they're actually the most ideal unit for extra gubbins to reduce damage of 1 on a 30 wound unit for 250 points is pretty freaking fun to do. At least it doesn't require character support too, which is what I like. Now we have Titanic Walkers. Stampa is king of all Titanic Walkers, of all the codex and any detachments. The Stampa Dread Mob is the best. There is argument to use the more Dakka one because you don't want to do damage to yourself. But like I said throughout this video, damage can be optional. And in the Stampa's case, you can just choose not to use his little piddly guns, such as his big shooters and the flamers. So you take less hazardous tests and you really just take advantage of the damage stacking on his biggest weapons. But as for the Mork and Gork, you have their transport ability is king here. Being able to position the same firing packages that we're going to talk about within them, and then getting all the same line of sights together, hiding in the same kind of pockets of safe zones, and then really saturating the enemy with Dakka when they all unpack and come out the field is pretty awesome. Like I said, they're multi-phase damage because of the stratagems we spoke about, because of what they're allowed to do between shooting and fighting. You have tank shock that can be incorporated for them as well. And so a lot of the time people do pick Titanic Walkers to kind of add as a support. Again, I do only advise one of these units typically if you're going to go for more of them, kind of like a saturation. Maybe look a little bit more into more Dakka, but if you're talking about just bringing one more Gork, I do think they have a place in this detachment a lot of the time. So that's what they are. They're pretty sick, and with everything that's being unraveled with Tankbustas, Breakaboys, stuff like that, you can stick them inside the Mork and Gorks and run through terrain pieces or unpack little SWAT teams. I freaking love it. Don't underestimate the transport capacity of these units, but they are quite soft, and there are other more videos unpacking that and how I would use them, so check those out. But we move on to the big tech Dakka. So we have the big mech Dakka right here. I know the slide looks simple, but that's because if I've put everything on it, this would be oversaturated with words. So we're going to unpack this unit by unit and talk about how we would actually want to play this on the field. So we start with the big mech, because I think the big mech gets overlooked a lot of the time because everybody wants to do damage. But what about the versatility? So we have the big mech, which is the most versatile leader in this detachment. as he brings you the Tankbustas. When he now, a lot of the time you're thinking I'm going to put him only on the shock attack gun, but there's sometimes where you bring more than 3 units on your list, right? You already have 3 shock attack guns. How would I incorporate the big mech with something like Tankbustas, for example? Well, his versatility comes into play where I would choose his custom Mega Blasta. And if I'm using the Pulsar Rocket, of course, when it's popping off, that means he's also taken to the same strength threshold as the shock attack gun. The only difference between the custom Mega Blasta and the shock attack gun would be the static 3 shots compared to the D6 shots plus 1. Then you have the additional -2 AP, and then the taking battle shock damage. Taking battle shock ability. Other than that, they have the same strength and then the same damage, and they're both giving the unit reroll 1s to hit. So in this case, when you're taking him and actually allowing them to get -3 AP, maybe you gave him the ignore cover ability. Maybe you're going into demons, for example, and you just want more guys that have access to the abilities and data sheets. You can end up taking advantage of the big mech with shock attack gun in this play. Now, if you can even consider that with the Tankbusters and him having a knob with smash hammer in the unit, if you get into combat and it's between the big mech and the knob with smash hammer, you can take the equivalents to a war boss with a knob in a unit, right? Because that now tank hammer boy, you can choose to press the button and choose to give him additional 2+ AP. Which you're thinking, why would I do that? Well, if it's 4+ and you're going into an enemy Space Marine vehicle and you have -4 AP on one of those smash hammers and he's already damaged, well, then in that case, you can just melt through him with just your knob with the 1 smash hammer from your Tank Buster unit. And then you have obviously his punches that can go in tandem with that between his, if you like, his claw or his power climbing or his actual drilla. So he's versatile in that way that if he went on a Tankbuster unit, he's allowing them to act as a more diverse unit themselves. That also goes true for the Lootas in a similar aspect, where he can kind of be acted as, well, this is a cheap unit to run out and actually be engaged more up the field. Now, you can stick 2 mech guns on him, and then just have them actually jump out through terrain. You do have to stack right up on that terrain piece because you only move through in 3 inches. But we've seen him be used in UKTC terrain, some WTC terrain, and even GW layouts where people have decided to bring 2 mech guns and a big mech, and he allows them to pass through terrain features, which helps them with their static abilities. Now, we do know that there's a lot of demon primarchs that are going to be existing and running around. So if you're feeling kind of frisky, of course, you can choose to use tractor cannons and be hilarious like that, as he does himself have anti-fly 2+. So there's a meme that goes around that you can do like 80 damage to a demon primarch. Yeah, Matt, that's true. You hypothetically could. Not super likely, but you could. With that being said, you could just also use smasher guns, bubble chuckas in that case, and that provides additional Dakka support there. Like we spoke about before, the mech guns can still take advantage of Dakka, so they can re-roll the entire hit roll if he's applied to them anyways, and he gives them the re-roll 1s because their data sheet is re-roll 1s, but it doesn't work on like vehicles and monsters, so it's kind of dumb. So in this detachment, he helps offset some of that too. Then we have the basic baby mech. Now, the basic baby mech is the cheapest keyword addition. What I mean by that is with any of the units that he's listed that he can go with, the really thing you're thinking here is I'm applying the mech keyword now to this unit so that it has access to the datasheet abilities. So he's how, if you want to saturate your list with 3 Lootas, 3 Tankbustas, then you're going to go 3 baby mechs and 3 shock attack guns, for example, because they're the cheapest way to add the the keyword and redundance. So what people like to do sometimes as well is they'll take the Loota squad and the mech and they'll use that as kind of like a versatile standoffish unit where it could just take long firing lanes. Maybe they give +1 to hit to a nearby truck for firing deck that has tank busters in it. Maybe it gives +1 to a Morkanaut or Gorkanaut when they disembark from him. So there's ways that he can actually be used kind of like in a combo utility way, which we have we have a video on that as well that you can check out too, which more in depth on that. But he can also go with tank busters, but I typically don't advise doing that because there's 2 other better options from the other 2 presented here on the list for that. But and for smaller games, maybe knobs, he does give the keyword to knobs. So again, like I said, if you're deciding I'm going to bring a Gorkanaut and I want to bring a 5-man unit of knobs and I have a baby mech, maybe he gives them the ability and I can poke the Titanic Walker. So that can end up being a thing that if you want to try to work out as you're working into Dread Mob with more utility. But his real ability to give Dakka support tech is by being alone or just being next to a truck, like we spoke about earlier, to take advantage of firing deck for the other units that may be inside of it. Then we move to the shock attack gun, which he's just straight damage. A lot of the time you're just looking at him because he's where you're going to actually melt through Space Marine armor that we hate. You're going to melt through those space Tyranids. And for the most part, he's just the most iconic unit for all of our Dakka among all of our entire codex. So ideally, he's going to go with Tankbustas, but there is an argument for at least sticking one of your shock attack guns on a Looty unit. The typical reason why you'd want to do that is for Overwatch, as now you do have a reason to simply choose lethal, for example, if you're going to, for someone's going to move for a land raider near on the middle objective, and they didn't kill your Looty unit yet, but they're simply moving already. Well, there's a chance that when you've touched that objective, okay, well, now you're in the open, you don't have cover. I'm actually going to have -1 AP on all my my def cannons, and my custom mega blast is going to be -2 AP, and then my shock attack gun's going to be wounding you with -4, automatically wounding you on all those lethal hits. It happens. It goes crazy. It goes well on Tyranids. There's a bunch of reasons why you could choose to put a shock attack gun on your Looter unit simply for the Overwatch potential and the range that it has. Of course, you could still only Overwatch in 24-inch range, so you're not doing it from there. So don't take yourself out of Overwatch potential range necessarily. But if you can find a really good position to Overwatch 2 different objectives, or have overlooking position of 2 different objectives, if you can play on terrain that's above 5 inches, I think 6 inches, you get plunging fire, which doesn't typically happen, but I know some of you get to play on it. So of course, take advantage of that too. There are reasons why you would put them on a Lootas squad. So that's why I brought up the Big Mac earlier, because there's a chance that you're going to take 2 SAGs on 2 Tankbusters, 1 on a Luta, and then 1 Big Mac on another Tankbuster unit, for example. But last but not least, you could put 1 on a shock attack gun on a mech gun unit. But typically, for the other reasons, the units I suggested earlier, I would put it on those. But he is an option as well. If you're going to be using the stratagems to reroll the whole hit rolls, who else would you want to reroll the whole hit rolls other than the shock attack gun alongside those mech guns, right? So that's some of those stock of support that if you're talking about unit combinations. So we talk about the walkers, we talk about these unit combos that can end up on the list, as we're going to see in variety. But we're also going to talk about Dakka support, like key units that can end up helping you actually execute all this rain of Dakka upon your enemy. So what I do want to mention, though, as a side note of what you want to keep in mind, is there's Big Mac crumping, right? There is an argument for bringing some sort of infantry melee support alongside your shooting. A lot of the time, maybe people don't have 3 Tankbusters, 3 Lootas, and such like that. You can't oversaturate the field. There is arguments to bring a Big Mech or optional War Boss, and you stick them on a Breaker Boys unit or a Mob of Boys unit. So for a Breaker Boys unit, the appeal here is that you can choose to give yourself additional AP of 2+ on critical wounds. That means if you're going to a Space Marine vehicle, you can choose to give yourself -4 AP on those anti-tank hits. So you're just melting people with the Breaker Boys. Now, the volume isn't there necessarily because you're not hitting on 2+ and you're not getting sustained like something on Warhorde, for example. But a lot of time you're only bringing 1 of these units on this list if you choose to. And even with 3 to 4 of those landing, those hammer hits, those are going to be -4 AP on those, not to mention those dev wounds that you're going to get through, as well as the Big Mac himself. So you're averaging about 4 to 5 -4 smash hammers on a vehicle or monster unit. So that's depending on your meta if you want to protect into that. But I absolutely love it when it goes off. It feels really, really good and it's exciting. You can obviously choose sustained as well, or you can be crazy again and just let it roll. But I would hate to get lethal. Then we have the Mobs of Boys. So you can choose to put a War Boss for the Mobs of Boys, because remember, you can't go a Big Mac and a Pain Boy, as you need to have a War Boss to have dual, like 2 different leaders on a unit. But you can take a Big Mac on his own, alongside something like Zod, for we're going to talk about in a little bit, where you're going to just keep the enemy unable to interact with your gun lines. You're going to just create a big wall of meat and screens of OC between grots and boys, and a lot of the time that can end up working out in your favor as well. It is hard to incorporate all that on a list, but for those gits that don't have access to all the Dakka that they may need, boys are the meat and potato of our codex. The Big Mek being able to move through screens is the important factor here. So he is giving them the data, you know, the pressing the button access, but there's not really a lot of time you're going to care to choose it. You're just going to let it roll, unless you really want to get lethals, for example, or sustain against an ideal target. But the real factor is that you get to re-roll the advance roll from the Big Mek on that big mob unit of boys. So on your wall, you're going to have Zod run forward. You're going to have this Big Mek unit with the boy mob run forward, and the boy mob is going to re-rolling the advance. Zod's going to be moving 12. You've now created a whole, 40 something, 40, 46, 45 bodies of 2 OC, 5 up invuln, and what sort of defensive buffs that can also exist. Of course, a Big Mek could take stealth. That's a good way to keep people off your Titanic units from punching them, keep units off your Lootas, your Tankbustas, your trucks, your mech guns, kilocans, every unit that we've talked about to create kind of that extra space is a big deal, where mobs of boys can kind of act as an additional layer and help keep people at arm's distance, which is what Dread Mob wants to do. So then we move to the Big Mek in Mega Armor, which is another part of Dakka support that can act as an hammer and anvil unit. Of course, you can give them stealth to this. You can act as this is inside of a transport, and then we're deployed right on the line. They disembark 3, they move their 5, and then or they advance, and you tow out maybe one of your mega knobs onto the objective, maintain coherency, and if the enemy chooses to activate into that mega knob, maybe you can regrow onto that objective. It really entices the enemy to actually come out and play, because a lot of the time your guns in as orcs themselves are only 24 inches, like the rockets, for example, are most potent weapons, and we want to do damage by association a lot of the time. So getting the enemy to get closer, to commit to us, to get in the firing lanes first, to go into a unit that is built for tanking range damage helps. The fact that you have grots that can act as the screen to stop something like an 8-bound unit from simply running this guy down is another factor as well, that you can use it for reactive moves. Now, it does take away some of its teeth, right, for damage, because we know the Big Mek and Mega Armor is the only way you can actually get them to hit people reliably. But a lot of the time, if you're choosing kill saws and maybe a kill saw and a power claw because you don't want to waste your time rolling your dice on this unit for shooting necessarily, just letting the button kind of roll on or choose one of those buttons instead of rolling it for either of those melee weapons can offset the fact that you have crappy lack of hitting ability on this unit. But it's really meant to draw the enemy closer to you and to really start kicking off the game, as it's built to take damage with the 4-up invuln, with stealth, with regenning a guy. No one enemy unit is going to activate into this. If an enemy, even if 2 ballistas dreadnoughts activate into this unit, on average, maybe 3 dreadnoughts die at most. 3 killer mega knobs can die here, unless you just absolutely whiff on all your 4-up invulns. So this will entice the enemy to get closer, can regen them, and then keep activating into the game. Now, as for the gun support, if it's like a teleporter, or because you're a git that wants to take free advantage of re-rolling the ones and you want to use your Mega Blaster from your Big Mek that's in this unit, go ahead and use it, as long as you keep in mind that time is a factor when you're playing Dread Mob. So if you can eliminate any of these kind of shooting activations to limit your ability to just clock out, then you might just want to get rid of that and just choose melee weapons and let your custom Mega Blaster go off as he can natively, because this unit is actually meant to hold maybe a natural expansion alongside some grots that are going to act as more of the OC, and bait the enemy more than act to go out and get the enemy. That's what a lot of the rest of the list is doing. And speaking of going out to get the enemy, we have Zagrot Wartsnag in his super runs. So in this case, in my opinion, he personally was the one that was the greatest impact from the WAAAGH changes for this detachment. So this detachment was the only detachment that didn't mind the prior WAAAGH conditions. So because you could use it in a defensive format, you can actually take advantage of Zod in that way instead. that means that the Zod utility is used differently in this detachment because the WAAAGH changes. Therefore, it is a much more aggressive and optional reactive WAAAGH. A lot of the time, the WAAAGH is actually going to come into play where you've reacted when the enemy has fallen back from you to shoot at you. That's where you actually might end up getting that off more, because what I really want you to do with your WAAAGH when you're playing Dread Mob now with Zod is to act more offensive and to really pin down the enemy gun lines in certain positions so you can take up that halfway point of the table and take up the firing lanes and not really have to expose your trucks right away just to move up the field and get disembarked. So Zod allows you to, one, keep the enemy at arm's reach, two, really harass the enemy natural expansion objective. Your main goal a lot of the time would be there, or to try to get the enemy primary objective. So the reactive move is amazing at 12 inches here now, but still I want you to be proactive, aggressive with Zod, but he's pretty much on all of my Dread Mob lists. Now, if you're not using him, you are using some other source of maybe an infiltrate unit, maybe a Synchra or commandos, because you still want to occupy some space. Now, Gretchen are a big key unit in this detachment, taking a lot of small units alongside Zod's big big brick is really good for you. Just letting one start in a transport, reserving one or two of them. You cannot let enemies get behind you in this detachment because how slow we are and the linear gameplay that we kind of have. So really screening is a big factor here. So taking units that can actually screen and maintaining that screen is a big deal in your backfield to stop deep strikes, but also taking advantage of reactive moves to really, control the range for those melee armies that are trying to hold the distance on you. Another unit that I kind of like to use for controlling the distance and range are actually shock jump Dragstas of some sort. Maybe you can say Def Coptas, whatever it may be, but my personal secret favorite tech piece is a shock jump Dragsta. I don't find myself currently bringing infiltrator units as I don't have the points. So a lot of the time, I just hope that if I'm playing search and destroy, then I'm gonna use my shock jump Dragsta to jump into the corner of the table to stop the enemy from being able to deep strike there too freely, or they act as a kind of harassment piece to the enemy to let them know I can continuously try to get into your backfield the whole game. There is an argument for those weird cases in certain matchups where you can, if you have a mech on your list and you have a shock attack gun, you can try to precision out an enemy character by hitting on 2+ in funny conditions. He has respectable OC, respectable durability. Enemies don't really want to kill him, but they might be forced to kill him, and he acts as good move blocking. So shock jump Drax is pretty fun for just taking up table space, because one thing that you really lack in Dread Mob is how fast you are. So anything that can kind of offset your speed helps here. So this is where trucks, biker, shock jump Dragstas, maybe Def Coptas, Storm Boys all come into play. And then, of course, you have flash kits for additional Dakka. So the additional Dakka factor here is that they already have sustain. So if you have Lootas, Tankbustas, and flash kits that all have access to sustain lethal, for example, mass damage, this is where you just get the all Dakka saturation on the list. So I a lot of the time find running the 5x5x10 units of flash kits is great support Dakka roles here. Of course, the flash kits also bring more combined arms factor as they want to take advantage of the wall and go forward. So they can act as more of a proactive skirmish and screen, to where in the early games they shoot, they run up, they fight, they push the enemy back, then your grots come out and start charging stuff on the wall as well. So flash kits are pretty awesome, and I do try to find them on my list when I can for the mixture of offensive potential, defensive potential, and just all-around, all-purpose gameplay. And of course, like I said, the truck support, because you don't have assault. You aren't playing more Dakkas, so your Tankbustas, your Lootas are really kind of slow and hard to get in line of sights. They act as big bricks. I have played games where I don't have trucks with them. It does take a lot of reserve understanding, deployment understanding. So a lot of the time, the trucks just help you with mobility and keeping those units safe. Of course, they keep them safe from also Overwatch, right? Oath of Moment to be Overwatch. So a lot of the time, a proactive Space Marine player will call an oath on a unit that he knows you're going to tow out or jump out to shoot at him. Therefore, being embarked in a truck, a Morkanaut, a Gorkanaut, like we spoke about earlier, is a good way to not get your Tankbusters proactively called out for oath and then shot when they expose themselves. So with that being said, let's move on to the example list to close this out. So this is flexible starting list is what I called this. That's because there's a lot of flexibility in here, but I am consolidating all the ideas that we've talked about today on this in this presentation into this one list, and explain how I would use these and why they're on the list and what I would possibly substitute. What's fun about this list is I try to keep it to 2 things of each, with viable substitutions for most of them. Excuse me. So right off the bat, Big Mek. I want to use my Big Mek. I want to use my Uftak because he looks like a Big Mek. So I stuck him on the list. Custom Mega Blaster with the Power Claw. In this case, he is going to go with my Tankbuster unit. He is going to take advantage of the Pulsar Rocket, and I'm going to take advantage. I put 2 pistols there, but honestly, you can choose to use a hammer like I spoke about earlier to make it so he can run out and fight for his own case. Then we have 2 shock attack guns. One is going to go on the Lootas unit, and then one is going to go on the other Tankbuster unit. We have a Baby Mek as the Warlord. Now, this is a unit that I constantly find myself putting on and off. This is all subject to you because this is a recommendation list. The Mek allows you to, 1, not get a Warlord murdered by something like an Imperial Knights matchup, which typically is already a curve piece in this for this detachment to deal with. Therefore, you can kind of offset that if you have them kind of hidden. But like we spoke about earlier throughout the whole video, is 1, he gives your truck support. 2, he can act as an early way to give your Death Dread that you have on this list to go crazy. 3, your Gorkanaut can take advantage of him, and he can run around healing some Killicans. So he has versatility all over the place on this list, as you can see, even if he's not attached to a unit. But if you didn't like what you see here, you start to drop some stuff, and you put another unit of Lootas on the list, the Mek can still be attached to the unit to give them access to the button. Then we have Zagrod. Zagrod, of course, is an auto staple unit for me, where I'm sticking the 22-man unit of Gretchen on him. I've then added 3 minimum size unit of Grots on this list. This is kind of my favorite 50-point package here in Dread Mob, where this is where I find my secure spot. I don't really like to go less than this on Gretchen or combos if I can for my battle line. And I sometimes find myself adding a little bit more. So this is where I advise a core of about 50 Grots on your list. 2 trucks, you can kick this up to 3 for reasons I spoke about to avoid oath, but we do have a Gorkanaut to take advantage of a transport capability. So on this list, I do only have 2 trucks, but they are taking my SWAT teams of Flash Kits and 2 Tankbustas. I do have 1 Danuke Death Dread. That's because I'm a flavorful git, so I like to use what I like to use. And in this case, I have my Custom Mega Blaster Death Dread, where he's going to come out early. I'm going to shoot at enemy transports. I'm going to use shoot at enemy light vehicles. I'm going to shoot at enemy elites. I'm going to do whatever I want with him because I can just choose to re-roll the entire hit roll. I'm going to get 9 Custom Mega Blaster shots. If I can, I'm going to maintain the Meks going to be in range to give him +1 to hit. So in this case, he's going to be hitting on 4s. Maybe even offsetting maybe a smoke that a transport might try to do. And then I would re-roll the entire hit roll. If I'm wounding them poorly, I would choose lethal. If I'm trying to throttle damage, I would choose sustain. But remember, a lot of the time, you do want to be CP reserved on this because I do have Killicans on this, Gorkanauts. So I don't know if I would use big shells for bigger gits necessarily. That's up to you based off the actual conditions of the battlefield. And then we got the Gorkanaut, because when it's wall time, I want to come forward with some walkers, mechs, shoot, charge, fight, tank shock, take up the field, reoccupy that space that everybody tried to take from me after they killed all my grots, right? So a lot of the time, this guy stays safe until that actual wall turn where he can develop the 5-up invuln. Do not peek him to do small arms fire before that. And then the 6-man unit of Killican. So if your Death Dread is not in reserves and he's playing the early game, then it may be in this case your Killicans are in reserves. If there's a safe spot for you to play with your Killicans, I think that's totally fine too, because keep in mind, you're going to be able to assault for him, possibly shoot, advance, and charge in assault. So it'd be fantastic. I love it. With all of his rockets, with all of their damage spiking potential of damage 3 and 4. So you have a bunch of damage 4 and 3 throughout this whole list. Damage of punches, damage from shooting, mortal wounds from bomb squigs. It's obnoxious. It's fantastic. And then, like I spoke about, the Shockdom Traxta. And then last but certainly not least, the War Bikers. So I do like to have some cool little War Bikers. Of course, like I said already, you can decide that you don't like shock jumps, you don't like War Bikers, and you want to bring 2 units of Storm Boys, and you don't like the Death Dread. That's why it's called flexible starting list, right? It's meant for what do you actually have and you own, and then you can incorporate it into this outline. So that's for you gits that are like to get cunnins and want to get stuck in with the Dread Mob. So that's where we're at for the Dread Mob Recharged. Now look at the comments in the chat real quick. But for the summary, all in all, I think Dread Mob, the more you play it, the more you fall in love with it and identify with it. The stratagems, the stacking, the defensive abilities, the battle line grots. It really just makes it feel like that you can win a large variety of matchups in ways that the enemy doesn't understand or expect. A lot of the time, game knowledge is a real tool in 40K. So the enemy not being aware of what your detachment can do, even though obviously you're going to be honest with them and upfront on what you can do, in the actual game when it's go time, when it comes to decision making, whether they have time to make the right one or don't know how to make the right one, the lack of knowledge of this detachment throughout all of 40K is going to be a tool in itself. So just keep in mind, you have to be a cunning git, and it is a very fun detachment where you can take advantage of high damage of 3, 4, and have saturation of +1 to wound. Tankbustas being incorporated into this detachment is a huge deal in our codex, and it really goes far and wide for our Great WAAAGH. So with that being said, I'll look at the strats real quick. And yeah, Dread Mob is my favorite in the game currently. Big Mech and Mega Armor sounds wild to try with Teleporter and Stealth. I would obviously put I think you meant the actual shield. So right, take the force field and stealth. Yes, I absolutely love to let people like shoot at him and then regen guys back onto the objective. If someone tries to charge him and fight him, you can reactive move with Grots to get in the way. You can heroic Grots to get in the way. And there's just so much you can do with this detachment that really comes out with your cunning gits. And then custom, where the Rockets, boss? What's up, Joe? I'm glad to see it. No, I'm actually more of a fan of custom Mega Blasters because I want my assured shots. I'm not scared to blow myself up, and I love to just scare the enemy with a bunch of D6 shots. If I just tell you, like, oh yeah, I got 9 shots of D6, and I could choose lethal sustain or re-roll the entire thing, and I give myself +1 to hit, so I'm hitting on 4s with this one stupid unit. They're like, I don't even want to kill that guy, but now you make me think I have to. That's where it comes into play, and it becomes hilarious. I would get rid of the Warbikers and make it. Yeah, exactly. That's why the list is just whatever you feel like doing. I want to run it, but I don't have the models. No, I totally understand that. You get, and that's just something as you collect and slowly develop, you know, you can kind of fill out. We should look at stop with damage output in relation to the market out relative to their point cost. That's a fun one right there too. What I would say though is you can actually in Dread Mob revolve your whole list around the Stampa in annihilating any enemy Death Star unit of I think I can survive this is going to get annihilated by the Stampa, excuse me, and then the rest of your list can be like Gorkanauts, Morkanauts, or Killicans, for example. Whatever it may be, Stampas are legit as heck, and they do really well in Dread Mob. We have the receipts to show it on the channel. So with that being said, there's only one thing to keep in mind. Is don't cross our wall because we'll knock your teeth out. And be on the lookout for more detachment breakdown videos, as this is the first of many, as we're going to do them all. Whoa!